This is a talk on headless and a term that I've coined called brainless WordPress. And in its overview, we're going to be learning about a higher level way that you can use JavaScript with the WordPress REST API in order to build some really dynamic and amazing things. And if you see anything issues, I mean, you guys have been doing this all day. If you see any issues with slides or anything, just let me know. So my name is Ben Moore. Everyone calls me BMO because Ben was too short. And I'm currently the Customer Experience Operations Business Intelligence Developer at WP Engine. And I'm also the founder, owner, and operator of SkyPress, a web development agency here in Austin, Texas. I'm the foo, and my wife is in charge of all of our business administration and relations. That's right, I'm the foo, she's the bar. It's funny. So everyone knows that WordPress isn't a blogging platform anymore. It's expanded so much beyond that. In fact, it's not just a CMS. It's expanded even past that, especially with the introduction of the REST API. And whenever it first came out, the REST API, I was ecstatic. I was absolutely thrilled. As a business intelligence developer, I use APIs and data all day long. And it finally gave me an opportunity to use that knowledge and bring it back to the community and really get even deeper and more deeply involved with WordPress. And it made me want to build more. It made me want to learn more. It made me want to start incorporating as many technologies as I could with WordPress, because that's the entire power of the REST API. It's bringing in and also providing data everywhere. So there are 3 ways that I found to use JavaScript with WordPress and the REST API. But before we get into that, jumping ahead of myself a little bit, I want to go over why we use WordPress, JavaScript, and the REST API, and why the 3 of those can make a beautiful pair or trio. There's more that you can do with WordPress. And there's more that WordPress has to offer than just blogging or CMS. And if you think about it, it's a very, very, very powerful tool. It's got lots of features just baked right in that if you were trying to build a single page web application using any other platform, these are things that you may or may not have to build out yourself. If you think about the user management just as it is, it's been around since WordPress 2.0, which means that it is solid and stable and secure. WordPress 2.0 is the same time that the text editor, I know it's going away, but the text editor had a fancy little button down at the bottom right that you can click and drag and resize, right? That was a feature release in WordPress 2.0. along with user management. WordPress is also great at getting data. I've heard of it called a PHP wrapper for MySQL, and that's all that it is. And it kind of makes sense. But WordPress in and of itself is powerful. The other technology that I love to use is JavaScript. It is the new hotness. It is what is coming up and coming out and is changing the world. It used to be something you disabled because hackers could get to you, and now you basically can't live on the internet without JavaScript. It pulls in fantastic content, and it gives you so much freedom to really utilize resources properly outside of just your little web server. And lastly, the REST API. It is, if I haven't said it, it's fantastic. It's my favorite thing to come into WordPress in a very long time. So the 3 approaches I talked about. And anyway, the three approaches I talked about. We have limbless, headless, and brainless. And these are different ways to be able to incorporate JavaScript, WordPress, and the REST API. Traditionally, with WordPress, when you build a site, everything in white there, that is something that is HTML that PHP has to render, and it is doing all of it. The most common process to incorporate JavaScript is a limbless sort of solution, in the sense that just little sections of your entire site are going to be using JavaScript. You might just be pulling in the content, or you might just be doing something on the sidebar, right? Maybe that's your Twitter feed. Maybe that's a form, and you're using admin Ajax to process and send that request back. Or it is a WooCommerce cart. Those are smarter to be using as admin Ajax for caching and whatnot. The problem with it, though, is while that helps speed up your performance, give you a little bit of flexibility, every time you go to a new page, just like these slides, the entire thing has to be reloaded using PHP. And I knew that there had to be something better that WordPress could be doing about that. Then came along the REST API. And it's going to let the back end do its thing, and it's going to let the front end do its thing. And we're going to take advantage of a lot of JavaScript frameworks like Angular or React or Vue or even Backbone to its full potential. So if limbless is a little bit going on and everyone wants to use a powerful framework, then I feel like they jump to the next solution, which is headless. And with headless, you're taking anything that can make an HTTP call, and you're sending those calls to WordPress over the REST API. So on the right there, you see in orange, that is your JavaScript building the entire site, and only data over the REST API is being sent through WordPress. And I'm going to say it again to specify: a headless WordPress install only sends data over the REST API. What consumes that data is completely up to you. Great feature about headless is you can also use any API to build your site. You have complete freedom over that. It doesn't have to be WordPress. It can be Drupal, it can be Twitter, it can be Facebook, it can be whatever API you want to tap into, or all of those in tangent, whatever you need to do to build your site. There are some caveats though. If you're using a headless WordPress, then on the front end, you're not using WordPress. You're not actually using its functionality. You're just getting data from it, which means that a lot of the features, powerful features, you may not be able to take full advantage of. You probably have to build it yourself. If you have a single page app built out of Angular sitting in one server, and you have your actual headless WordPress sitting in another one, then you now have to manage authentication on both ends. You have to have someone sign in on the front, and your Angular app has to know who they are in order to send the properly authenticated requests to WordPress, which then also has to authenticate that that request is what it is. And now you're already starting to see the problem. With headless, you may have multiple different hosts having to run your entire ecosystem of an application. And that can get expensive pretty quickly. So my solution to this is something that I've been trying to formulate and really get into people's brains. And it's something people are kind of doing natively, but I just don't want to sound pedantic, but want people to be calling it just what it is. And that is a brainless solution. In Brainless, on first page request, WordPress is still going to load the page. But that page is just a small little shell. And that's that dotted white line right there. This shell is primarily going to take care of loading in your static assets, your JavaScript, your CSS, and then there's going to be one little snippet, in Angular, I know this is how it works, one little snippet that instantiates the actual JavaScript application. So you can still use WordPress for its fantastic resources, and it's going to load a very, very tiny page, and then JavaScript is going to take over from there. And it also means that as you click around, you're not reloading the page all the time. JavaScript is still taking care of that. And it's pulling in any other resources from any other API that you want, just like a full headless. WordPress only is being used on the front end 1, maybe 2% of the time. Just like everything, there are some slight problems, and it really depends on the scope of your project and what you want to be doing. Even with Brainless, you're not going to be able to build out native applications. If you think about an app on your mobile phone, that is a pure definition of a headless solution, largely because when you disperse your front end, those are all living on people's individual phones, and they're all making API calls back to your headless server just to receive the data. So the front end isn't being hosted anywhere per se, it's just living on individual phones. With a Brainless solution, you're not going to be able to do that because you don't want to really ship an entire WordPress stack onto everyone's phones just to make API calls back to you. And it also means that you're likely going to be limited to WordPress common technology. So we're talking PHP, MySQL, Nginx, Apache, everything that we've been doing fantastically for a long time, but incorporating Node or my mind just went blank for a little bit. Powerful routing JavaScript library for Node, Express, right? Those are things that you would use with a headless solution, building out your 100% JavaScript front end, but aren't necessarily needed when you're going Brainless because you can still take advantage of WordPress and how it handles and knows what to do with URLs and routing to the proper resources. So to wrap it up a little bit, headless is very much a, you break it, you buy it, and you're not really using WordPress, rather you are consuming WordPress. With Brainless, you can use as much or as little of the WordPress backend functionality as you want. But on the front, you let JavaScript take over after giving it that little bitty shell to run out of. And then REST API for everything in between, for as scalable and dynamic of a site as you could make even with the headless solution, make it with Brainless. And for everyone who doesn't like to read, here are some pictures. All right, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. I know that the REST API is a very exciting time. There are a lot of things coming out with it. I mean, look at Gutenberg, right? It is building some amazing things. And using the REST API, other JavaScript applications and frameworks and libraries, it's going to be exposing us to a lot of other communities, which is also fantastic. It also means that we are building things that have never been done before. which means that there's not going to be a right way of doing it. And so instead of focusing on what is the WordPress way of incorporating Vue.js onto my WordPress site, I want to remind everyone to just simply follow the WordPress philosophies that have already been laid out for us, that have created this amazing community we all love. I hope that as we explore other technologies and incorporate WordPress into many other facets of the internet, that we also take these philosophies and implement them into other communities. I also hope that we take other communities' philosophies and bring them back into ours. All right, that was fast. That was a lot faster than it usually is. I think the last time I gave this, it was a 10-minute speed talk, which is why I probably skipped over a lot of things. Wonderful. So let's do some questions. I can go over anything and everything in more detail. I can show some examples of how I've implemented a headless solution. Let's get the conversation rolling. All right, examples. Everyone wants the example. Let's show it. Let's get this. All right. So this is my personal website. There's not much to it. It's a single page JavaScript application. And by single page, I mean the only link here is really just a tag to go back down to this form. It's basic, I know. But let's watch something. If we view this source, that is all that it's loading. Let me just zoom in here. So it pulls in styles, it pulls in JavaScript, and this right here, this is Angular saying take over. And when we actually inspect it, here it is, AppRoot and Angular taking over and loading everything else in. And just to show you how API comes into play, let's come submit a form. And there it is. It's in a message over the API. But all of this is just as it is. And if I had my blog working, I would be able to click that and the whole thing wouldn't have to reload. So if you think about a web application, and you're going to have links all up here, all down here, and right in the middle is really what you want to be dynamic and change. Then as you click through, none of the header should change, this should change, it should just pull in the content you need here. Let me think if I have an example. That's a question. All right, Johnny asked, since all the content loading is happening via JavaScript, how does the site perform in SERPs? Do you have to rely on sitemaps rather than the actual content that the user would see? All right, this is a fun one. SEO and people trying to crawl it and see it. Oh man. Google, I know in particular, is doing better at loading full single-page web apps and being able to crawl it as a regular site. Other search engines, other technologies, not there yet. Even Facebook, not there yet. So using this technology for just a website may or may not have its benefits. Angular in particular. I know I have a few friends who use React and another library to build static sites, completely static, and save those HTMLs so that, yeah, it's very easy to crawl, very fast, and it's still using the same technologies. Angular in particular, great for building full-scale web applications where perhaps SEO and being scanned isn't your top priority, I would suppose. The technology, though, is getting there. It's just a matter of time of what's going to catch up first. Server-side JavaScript rendering or bots' ability to crawl JavaScript websites. Any idea on how Gutenberg will affect the REST API positively or negatively? Gutenberg is using the REST API very heavily, which means that it is funneling more attention and technology into molding the REST API. So in that aspect, it is very positively impacting it. How Gutenberg will impact the REST API on the front end for bringing in that data is a very, very interesting question when it comes down to what's actually going to happen when it releases. And I say that because I'm not entirely up to date with it, but it may or may not, each individual block may or may not be including its own assets. And so whenever you pull down a post through the REST API, how do you also get those assets with it and implement it into your solution? I really hope that it keeps on the same track right now, where when Gutenberg saves everything and you pull it down from the API, you're still getting just the HTML and you're not focused on all the other aspects with it. But I mean, we can also see Gutenberg is already pulling in its own special style, that's CSS. So great question. And I hope that it remains a positive impact. Gutenberg remains a positive impact on the REST API. But we'll find out. All right. Talk about authentication for Brainless. Yes. So on Brainless, whenever you load the first page, it pulls in the shell. It's also pulling in all of the backend functions. So that's going to include your WP logged in cookie. Whenever you make API requests, you pass along that cookie with it, along with a nonce. So you can see I've localized some things that I can bring in. This auth key is my nonce, and this is the proper header. So every API request returns the cookie and the nonce, and that nonce is responsible for being able to decrypt the cookie to show that I'm logged in. The other power with Brainless is you can also incorporate JSON web tokens so that every request gets its own authorization bearer token. So you can do authentication per API request completely independent of the WordPress login cookie and the nonces. That also means that you can incorporate OAuth 1 or 2, because when you're using the API, you get to dictate how your authentication gets sent back to the server. The power with Brainless is you also get to utilize already built-in authentication methods with WordPress on that first page load, and then use those configurations with the rest of your requests. I hope that answered the question, if that makes sense. All right, have I tried using WP GraphQL with the WordPress REST API? I personally have not, but I've actually been in several online discussions with WP Mastermind, or basically just Roy Boy. Hi, Roy. It's there. It works. WP GraphQL has, I mean, a lot of potential. It's going to be fantastic. Have to get some water. There's more that needs to go into it on the WordPress side or to really get the full benefit out of GraphQL, but I don't think there's been enough demand, I would say, to really mature that project. But I know it works, and it's definitely an avenue to look into if that is in your interest. Right now, the REST API follows JSON API standards, which is also fantastic. GraphQL is its own separate standards, but they do play nicely with each other. All right, and we answered about bots crawling your JavaScript. All right, should a single page application be built as a theme or a plugin? And my answer to that is it should be built as both. Pull this up real quick. So I would argue that your plugin be responsible for all of the expansion and extensions of the REST API. So your custom endpoints, your custom post types, et cetera, just like building a regular site. Your plugin should focus on how to optimize and extend the backend functionality, while the front end is the actual theming, the JavaScript. Come over here to themes. So in this example, my theme holds the JavaScript and CSS from Angular, and it displays that in my tiny little index right there. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's the exact same WordPress way that we've been doing it, of plugins extend out the backend and the functionality. The theme builds out the front end and the visibility. Does that help? Perfect. Thank you. I really wish I had another application to show you guys. A lot of the work I've been doing and building out is for WP Engine internally. So I don't know how much of a liberty I am of showing our internal tools, but I am working on a few things to be able to release public on my own time. So we have even more examples of how things work. Yeah, I wish I could, Jamie. If I was on my laptop, I have a few things in development, but sadly I'm on my desktop because it has a better camera and more monitors. All right, any other questions? Anything else you want me to dive into on a deeper level with what we've been talking about? So I'm gonna find my slides again. Oh, hi, Roy. You made it. All right, it's quiet, so let's see. Who's eating what for lunch, or what did you already eat for lunch? What about this? What is your favorite JavaScript framework? Let's see if I can get you guys to answer things. Oh, that's right. I can create a poll. I mean, I agree with you, Roy. Angular for the win. But everyone has different things. Some simple resources, or some resources to get started simply. It's a good question. Simple may not be the right answer, but it's more about what is the problem or solution that you're trying to solve for, Elaine? Hello world. All right. Angular 5 sounds daunting. It's TypeScript and everything, and it's stuff to get set up. But on their website, they're getting started. They show you how to use their CLI, and they do a fantastic hero walkthrough, set them up. It is amazing and simple, and it'll get you running quickly with the basics. Angular can get very deep and very technical fast, but angular.io and just click the getting started. They have a very great walkthrough that's really straightforward. Vue is also very easy to get set up. Don't get me wrong. I have nothing against Vue. I've just never had a need to use it. The Angular hasn't been able to take care of, to be honest. Actually, the other JavaScript framework I've used the most with is Ember. Yeah, there's a lot of JavaScript frameworks. It really comes down to what are you trying to build, and if it's the right fit for that particular project, more than it is which framework in its entirety is more powerful than the other. Because I mean, you can do a lot of just jQuery or even native JavaScript in and of itself. So it all comes down to what you're trying to do to begin with. Beyond SEO implications, how the Brainless setup affect things like caching, preloading content, speed, yada, yada, yada. All right. The powerful thing about Brainless is because all of the content you're going to be using will be dynamic through the API. Then you can cache your static assets for the next 10 years if you want, because those aren't going to be changes. If the majority of the work PHP has to do is responding to API requests, then that is now minimal resources it really has to load. PHP takes up the most time actually rendering that HTML, but it can do simple things like, what is 4 plus 4? Here's your answer. It's 8. So when it comes to caching your endpoints, you have to be really careful about which it's okay if it's not up to date in the next 10 minutes or what needs to be dynamic right here, right now. But all of the other resources that build your site, cache them. And if you make a change, clear your cache and then cache them for another 10 years. Preloading content, I think it's fine. I'm a big fan of it. Again, something to be careful of whenever you have authenticated users and then you localize some assets like what is the username. But it's just a per situation basis. But I really believe that using JavaScript and the REST API will speed up sites immensely and also greatly reduce server resources. All right, as a WordPress site builder, if you've never used Angular, Vue, JavaScript frameworks, what would doing this add to my experience of WordPress? What kind of WordPress sites do you normally build? I guess I should say. Simple sites. Here's the fun part about this. Obviously, WordPress is successful because it's doing something right for so long. So perhaps this wouldn't do anything for you. Not to be too, not to be rude about it, but if what you're doing is working for you, for simple, not complex, you haven't hit that wall of, WordPress isn't doing X. How can I make it do X? How can I make it do X? Then this may not do much for you. PHP is a powerful tool. It's been working for a long time as is. But as soon as you need some dynamic elements, then I think that's when, take it to the next level with solutions like this. For you, I would honestly look into Vue. Vue, I don't want to say Vue is for simple things. Vue can build amazing things, but Vue is quicker to get set up for simple things. And really be able to utilize your client's resources, which is their own browser, in order to offload the resources from your server. If we build sites that rely heavily on WooCommerce, Gravity Forms, etc., will this be feasible, or is this better for smaller sites? I love WooCommerce. WooCommerce has its own REST API. you just have to be careful about the plugins you use, and if you're using them for your front end looks and functionality. If you are, then you have to rebuild that functionality yourself. So that might be hard. But Gravity Forms, they also do a great job of setting up the post types that you'll be using, if I'm correct about that. So you might just have to build the forms yourself. WooCommerce, you'll have to build your templates yourself. But when you're rebuilding your site as a single page application, then you're going to want to do it in that framework's proper way instead of a bunch of front end things trying to pipe it all together. Perhaps this is why Limbless is a better solution. So the things that you want to take advantage of the REST API, but also don't want to have to rebuild how everything works, because Gravity Form can probably do it better than all of us. That's what they do for a living. Then the Limbless solution of just using bits and pieces dynamically over the REST API in order to add more value to your site without having to reinvent the wheel of how to do it. That would probably be the better road. All right, I love talking about this, so keep them coming, or just keep up with me on social media. This was a very fun experience. I've never done something like this before, and 10/10 would do again.